South Africa is the most difficult place in the world to do business. Today we're tackling the bold claim by the IMF. They're saying that South Africa is the most difficult or challenging place on earth to conduct business. And this is really shocking. Is it a hyperbole? Is it a harsh reality? I want to know from you in the comment section. But as a nation, South Africa is grappling with a lot of issues. And some of these issues come from apartheid, the legacy of apartheid, the fact that our landscape is full of inequality. In fact, we're the most unequal society in the world. The economy, yes, it is resource and mineral rich. However, it suffers from structural issues that hinder growth, and they basically deter investment from investors. Now, to understand where we are, you need to go back and understand that South Africa was built on mineral wealth, primarily gold, diamonds, and apartheid used inequality, their system of apartheid. They used it to stop a majority of the nation from economic participation. Now where we're sitting, where we've transitioned to democracy, we still face a lot of apartheid legacy issues that are still there. And even though Black Economic Empowerment, BEE policy, was created to try and solve these things, there are still lots of hurdles to come across. And now business is saying all these bureaucratic hurdles and uncertainty for the country, they're saying it's scaring away investors and making it the most difficult place in the world to do business. Now, why is the IMF painting such a bad picture? Now, what is the IMF? The IMF is a cooperative of 190 member countries, and their mission is to ensure stability of international monetary system, and they do this by providing financial assistance to countries facing economic difficulties and offering policy advice and technical assistance. In essence, they are the world's economic doctors. They diagnose problems, they prescribe solutions. But the question here is, how would they truly know about economic stability in this world that we live in? And a lot of people are saying, hey, yes, we've got issues, but at the same time, there is a lot of power that they have over struggling nations. And they're saying that, hey, they basically are wary of the IMF. Now, the IMF says that their goal is to prevent some kind of economic chaos like World War II or the rise of extremism and ultimately war itself. But however, a lot of people have said that this global lender is not quite doing the things it says it should be doing. Now, when you look at the IMF's website, it says the IMF is a global organization that works to achieve sustainable growth and prosperity for all its 191 member countries. But here they are saying South Africa is the worst place to do business. I don't see how that is going to help South Africa actually achieve its goal. Now, the IMF has got 190 members. They were founded by 44 countries in this economic cooperative, and they are able to lend about 1 trillion to its member countries. This is 1 trillion US dollars. Obviously, they're lending it, so they are some form of loan establishment. And they're basically saying, hey, after the Great Depression, after wars, they were necessary to form because they are able to provide crucial loans to countries that face a lot of balance payment problems and war problems. However, their role has become quite controversial. There are lots of critics, and I'm going to go through one of the critics, but I want to just pause for a moment and say, here we've got an international authority that is saying that our country, South Africa, is the most difficult place in the world to do business. I think we ought to pause and not quickly rush through the statement, because what this statement lets us know is that there are issues, and the international community can already see these issues, and they're seeing these hurdles. A lot of time in our country, whenever there is information that comes out, the first thing is to be very defensive as South Africans. But it is a point of concern to say that there is or there are issues in our economy. Now, where I disagree with the IMF is that the IMF has also come out and they've pushed for privatization of public services. They're saying, hey, we need to reduce our government spending. And these things can leave a country very vulnerable and in very bad situations. They're also trying to portray this rise of globalization. And in all of this, there's a very big issue that people have, that they say that the IMF favors multinational corporations, billionaires and wealthy people, and they neglect the needs of countries that they should actually be fighting to protect. Now, obviously, as the IMF, it's 190 powerful countries. They've got $1 trillion US that they loan amongst each other. obviously they influence trade policies all around the world. They influence the environment. They influence social standards. And the debate today continues to say, should South Africa be taking this warning seriously, or should we be looking at the IMF and looking at some of the issues that could be going on with the IMF? Obviously, the IMF borrows these countries money and they expect them to implement reforms to address the underlying causes that they find might be issues. And the emphasis of this importance, they call it. They say that in places where there's economic problems, like Argentina, which is a client of the IMF, and in recent years, the IMF provided substantial financial loans to Argentina as a nation because it grappled high uninflation, currency instability, and debt crisis. However, the Russian invasion in Ukraine, that made a huge economic shock in those areas. And the IMF responded with financial assistance to help Ukraine. So this is where then people say, look, the IMF, yes, they do help countries, and other people say, no, the IMF actually sponsors war because they actually helped Ukraine fight back against Russia. So it is very controversial that people have opinions about the IMF, but you cannot downplay the fact that they do play a crucial role because they do have a lot of financing from a lot of countries, and they're able to disperse this financing in a very quick way. They do have resources, and they've got a lot of intervention programs that they do, but at the same time, people are saying, IMF, are you really playing the role you should be playing in the global economy? Now, when you look at their website, you don't really get much, but you do get a story around how they try to assist during war. But the argument then comes up to say, but if they're funding Ukraine, they're choosing a side, which becomes very complicated. And I don't want us to jump into that because we do analyze a lot of political news on this channel. But today I want us to really deal with the issue that South Africa, we're being rated by the IMF as the most difficult country in the world to do business. And I want to start here. One of the difficulties that many people have spoken about is electricity. To say load shedding impacts productivity and investor confidence. Of course, if you're an investor, you want to build any manufacturing plant or you want to do anything in a country, the first thing you check is there energy? And because we've got rolling blackouts and load shedding, this has really caused a lot of investors to be concerned. And I think this is one of the reasons why the IMF has placed us as the worst country in the world out of those that analyze to do business. Another important aspect we must never forget is youth unemployment. In South Africa, and I'm just taking a leaf off the South African government's website, South Africa, like many other countries globally, grapples with the challenge of unemployment. This is supported by statistics indicating a 45.5 unemployment rate among young individuals aged 15 to 34. And they continue on to obviously explain their point, and you can read it on the government website. But this causes or creates huge social instability. Consumer spending is literally wiped out because the youth that are supposed to spend on these businesses and products are unable to because our economy is not growing, jobs are not available. And to be very frank, politicians are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is benefiting the people of the nation. Now, there is the question of bureaucratic red tape, where a lot of people have said South Africa is filled with lots of officials and procedures, and the way of doing business does not protect the investor. There's a lot of that. There's also other people saying this is corruption. Corruption is the main cause why the IMF is saying this. But however, I believe all these things create a unique combination, and that's the reason why South Africa finds itself as the worst place to do business in the world, as according to this report. Obviously, there's also infrastructure issues where people are saying that our infrastructure is not upkept, social inequality, regulatory hurdles, and people are just saying it's a difficult environment. And this is investors saying it's a very difficult environment to be able to do business. They're also saying that there's a lot of interference from government. They're saying that in South Africa, when you're an investor and you want to open up a plant or a factory, you will find a government official coming and saying, "Where is my cool drink?" Only South Africans will understand that statement. They're also saying there's over-regulation and there's lots of corruption. And a lot of them are saying they are not happy with all the issues that deter people from being able to start businesses here and innovate. Now, in South Africa, we all know that the state owns a lot of things. However, a lot of people have also come into question to say some of these problems is because the state is owning stuff. The IMF wants people, individuals, to own electricity, to own things, and South Africans, as I would say they want the state to own things. You let me know in the comment section. But this has come to a point where it's now hindering growth. And this has real world consequences. Negative pronouncements can deter many investors. If you're an investor out there and you want to invest in any market and somebody says, this country has been rated the most difficult to do business, some investors might be deterred from that. And I think the problem is institutions like IMF, the international financial institutions like them, they actually have influence over countries. They have influence over wealth. They have influence. People listen to their recommendations. And for us, when we are now as South Africa rated in this way, it really is a very big problem to our free markets and our fiscal status. But it is important to understand as well that there are people that are saying this is wrong, this is bias, it's not true, South Africa is not in this situation. And I think I want to just read you a tweet by a gentleman known as Koshik, and he says, South Africa is the most difficult place in the world to do business. He says, business, media, and economists thrive on terrifying headlines, social media outrage, and ramping up fear. And he shows the graph that shows the report that we all saw that South Africa is leading as the most difficult place. And he says, having spent many years in the investment banking engine room, it's common to cherry pick economic data to support any narrative. Many of the viral finance charts floating around are math washed and designed to speak or spark a strong reaction. He says that South Africa is the hardest place to do business in the world, says against 49 other countries. Says if the world had 49 countries, this would be terrifying. So the first thing he's stating is that, hey, this report was not done on all the countries in the world. It was only done on a select few countries, and as a result of that happened. And he's basically saying if you added other countries like Zimbabwe and many other countries, South Africa might not have been the last one. So that's his first point. And then the next point he goes into, he basically goes into this report and he breaks it down to say this report is not accurate because when you look at all the other countries, you look at how they were scored, he says there were issues here. And this is what he says. He says, well, it's a questionnaire. And he's saying this was based on a questionnaire, a really long survey, 700 to 800 questions answered by government authorities and sector-specific regulators. And he says this is based on a questionnaire. And he's basically saying maybe the way the IMF is doing this is not correct. He also goes on to look at, unsurprisingly, all major BRICS nations score on the lower end of the scale. So he says if you look at all the nations that are part of BRICS, he says the IMF report gives them low marks. And we all know what he's trying to say here. He's trying to say that America and the dollarized countries are fighting the countries that are trying to get themselves out of the dollar and move into it. And he says on the lower rankings, 4 out of 5 countries are BRICS nations. And he says not by coincidence. He says there is a strong strategic focus on preserving national ownership across key sectors and reducing foreign dominance. These cover energy, telcos. So he's basically explaining, and I mean you can read the whole tweet, but he's saying, hold on guys, this IMF report is not important. They base it on a survey that's given to government and public sector officials. And he says at the same time, it looks like the research has been manipulated to tell a certain side of the story. Now, that I've given you both sides of the story. What is your opinion? Let me give you my opinion. So, I hear both sides. The first, the IMF saying, South Africa's got corruption. You've got youth unemployment at rampant age. You've got a lot of issues that would deter people from doing business. My problem is, when you look at some of the richest people in Africa and the world, majority of them have made their money from South Africa. A lot of them have made a lot of money in South Africa. You look at people like Elon Musk, who's been to the US and done very well. His starting capital for what he did came from his father, who owned an aeroplane while he was still growing up. How do you go to school and your dad owns an aeroplane? Of course, your dad was part of the apartheid system that made a lot of money. So it is clear that South African or people in South Africa have made a lot of money. They would continue making a lot of money if everybody else in the world believed that South Africa is difficult to make business, because their businesses will continue operating in South Africa, they'll continue making more money, they'll continue with the same status quo. Why would they want the world to come and eat out of their pie? First angle. Second angle, The report is flawed. Maybe we're not the worst place to do business in the world. The report is based on public sector. It's not based on business fundamentals. They don't look at the minerals. They don't look at the potential that young people could actually be a great working force if they train properly. So both sides of the story make a lot of sense. I'll tell you my opinion. My opinion is that yes, corruption is there. Yes, youth unemployment is there. Yes, we do have issues as a country. But I believe reports like this deter people from doing business in our country. And as a result of that, they leave our country poorer and out of economic opportunities. I believe this is a witch hunt. I believe this report is not accurate. I believe this report should be reworked and it should be based on proper fundamentals that speak to business opportunities that exist within South Africa. And I also do believe that perhaps the people that make money from South Africa, the people that ship our minerals every single day, the people that benefit from all the minerals that sit in this country, perhaps they are not looking for any competition because they thrive on a society that doesn't question them, a society that doesn't look at their books and ask how they're making all this money all this time, a society that is filled with apartheid trauma, a society that accepts things the way that they are. I've always believed that if South Africans were to notice how much foreign international companies make from South Africa, majority of them would demand more, expect more, and they would hold government accountable. But as a result of that not happening, we then see these issues where many of the South Africans are happy with a 350 grant and they're happy with just enough to feed themselves. And they're not asking themselves critical questions to say, where's the gold that built this nation? Where are the diamonds? Where's the money from all these minerals that continues to build this nation on a daily basis? And this is where I want to end off the conversation today. I want to pass it over to young people to say, we have got 45%, and allow me to use this statistic, of young people out there that are unemployed. The biggest opportunity that the rich billionaires that are part of the IMF have is to ensure that these young people do nothing. Yes, you heard me exactly. Do nothing. These young people can drink alcohol that is, smoke, reproduce, and not stand up and form formulations of themselves that can challenge the status quo. They continue to make money and they continue to be happy. And this is why I stood up as a young person with Arise South Africa as the leader to say, we cannot have a society of young people that sit and believe everything the media says. I myself come from Limpopo. And every single time you come from Limpopo to Johannesburg or you use alternative routes, you will see trucks leaving Polokwane, trucks leaving with minerals going down. Every single time you drive down to Durban, you will see the trucks leaving. If South Africa is such a bad place to do business, why are all these multinationals still here? Why do these trucks continually leave our nation? Why is it that the families that have been making money from this country have not stopped making money and they continue to make money and even become some of the richest people in the world? Why is it that people like Patrice Motsepe have become billionaires of the minerals of this country in a very short space of time? I don't think that South Africa is a bad place to do business. I think the people that do business in this country are comfortable not being challenged by young people. They're comfortable not being questioned. And as a result of that, they want the narrative for the rest of the world to be, don't touch South Africa, it's bad for business. Meanwhile, they double down and make more money from South Africa. So no, IMF, I disagree with you. This report is flawed. You need to tell the truth. South Africa is a great place to do business. However, there are many people that do business in this country that want young people, that want the institution, that want the media to make everybody externally believe that it's impossible to do business in South Africa. And some of the biggest issues we've got is the fact that South Africa has all the components to create things like self-driving cars. We've got the battery. We all know about mining in this country. There's a lot of people that are involved in mining. Zimbabwe as well has got all the minerals. We have everything that it takes to become a global superpower. But it seems that there is a narrative in the media, in business space to say our country is bad, our country should not be touched. And the only people that I believe could fix this is the 45% unemployed youth. I believe if they had to arise and wake up to the fact that the politicians that are in power are a very big problem and align themselves and begin to ask the relevant questions and demand change, then I believe that this country could change. But beyond that, IMF, stop it. And I want you to do me one favor. Please share this video, because everybody out there is believing that South Africa is a bad place to do business, and that's only going to deter the country from growing economically. Share this video with at least 5 people to educate them to say South Africa is actually not. South Africa is open for business, and South Africa has young people that do want to participate in the economy, and they are willing to learn skills that will assist our country become better. Thank you so much for tuning in.